My name is Daniel Cole. I'm 22 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the easy child, the quiet one, the one who didn't ask for much, didn't break the rules, didn't draw attention. Diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 11, I learned early on how to manage pain in silence. My parents always said they admired how low maintenance I was. What they really meant was that I was easy to ignore. My younger sister, Elena, was the star of the family, loud, impulsive, dramatic. She could cry and get a car, scream and get a phone. I could pass out from low blood sugar and get a lecture about responsibility. It started with a delay, a missing box, that should have come on a Thursday. I checked the tracking number 3 times before calling the pharmacy. They told me the auto refill had been cancelled. I froze. I hadn't touched the settings. My next instinct was to ask my parents if they knew anything. I didn't expect what came next. My mom didn't even look up from her phone. She just said, "We had to prioritize Elena's concert. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. You can ration what you have for a few extra days, right?" That moment, something cracked in me. Not from the insulin shortage, from the coldness in her voice. Comment: they chose the concert over my life. If you've ever been treated like an afterthought by your own family. I tried to explain that insulin isn't like aspirin. It's not optional. It's not something you stretch. But they didn't care. My dad tried to be the voice of reason, but even that felt like betrayal. "You've always been the strong one," he said. "You know how to survive a few days. Elena's been looking forward to this since last year." The words didn't hit all at once. They soaked in slowly, like poison. I realized then that they had made a choice, not out of desperation, but out of preference. My life was negotiable. Her fun wasn't. 3 days later, I collapsed in the middle of our kitchen. I remember the cold floor, the sound of Elena's laughter upstairs, and then nothing. When I woke up in the hospital, the doctor looked at me like I had a death wish. He said, "You were in diabetic ketoacidosis." Another few hours, and we'd be having a very different conversation. My parents arrived 2 hours later, not panicked, not ashamed, just annoyed. They brought Elena with them, still wearing her VIP wristband from the concert. I don't remember everything they said, but I remember Elena's words most clearly. "It wasn't that serious. You just overreacted." I didn't speak much after that, not to them, not even to the nurse, who asked if I wanted to report anything. I smiled politely, because in that moment I knew what had to be done. Not out of spite, out of necessity. This wasn't about revenge. This was about dignity, and for the first time in my life, I decided to stop being the easy one. I started planning that very night, and I didn't tell a soul, not even the doctor, who slipped me a card that said, "If you need help." I didn't need help. I needed clarity and silence, because sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the ones who shout. They're the ones who've been quiet for too long and have finally had enough. When you spend your whole life being the one who doesn't cause trouble, people start to forget that you're watching, that you're remembering, that you can hurt too. As I lay in that sterile hospital room, hearing the rhythmic beeping of machines that were keeping me alive, machines I needed because my own parents chose a concert over my medication, I started to understand just how deep the betrayal ran. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't even about Elena. It was about being seen as less valuable, less human, less worth saving. I thought back to all the signs I ignored growing up. The birthday parties where Elena got new electronics and I got socks. The family dinners where my dietary needs were a burden. The school events they skipped for her gymnastics meets. I used to rationalize it all. They're stressed. They love her. It's just how it is. But now I saw it clearly. I had been surviving, not living. And the people I called family had been feeding off my silence for years. That realization didn't make me angry, it made me calm, deadly calm. Because once you stop expecting people to care, you're free, you stop begging, you start building. I knew I couldn't confront them directly. They'd twist it, make it about me being dramatic or ungrateful. So I decided to do what they never expected. I would make them answer for it, without ever raising my voice. The first step was documentation. I had the hospital records, the doctor's notes, the billing details, the cancelled prescription receipts. I requested access to the pharmacy account and took screenshots of everything, the timestamp of the cancellation, the name on the account, my mom's. That was the crack in the armor. Then I began digging deeper. I requested copies of every medical charge my parents had filed through insurance. What I found made my stomach turn. They'd been reimbursing themselves for my medical supplies for years, through a flexible spending account under my dad's name. But not all of the money went to me. Concert tickets, a new iPad, a spa trip. It was all there, hiding in plain sight. I wasn't just neglected. I was used. My illness had become their side hustle. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat with the weight of it. And then I began to move slowly, methodically. I set up a private consultation with a legal aid organization for medical abuse and dependent exploitation. I told them everything. They didn't interrupt when I was done. The woman across from me said, "You have more than enough. And you've handled this like someone twice your age." I walked out of that office with a folder full of options, not revenge, justice. That night, my parents picked me up from the hospital like it was a chore. Elena didn't come. They didn't ask how I was, just whether I'd be going back to school next week. I nodded, but inside, I knew they were walking me back into their house for the last time, and they had no idea what was coming. The house looked the same when I came back, but I wasn't. Something in me had shifted. The quiet compliance they'd relied on for years had been replaced by something colder, not rage, not revenge, but precision. I kept to myself, ate my meals in silence, and kept my insulin locked in a portable medical safe I bought with my own money. I watched them, studied them. Every casual lie, every sidelong comment, every moment they expected me to forget what they'd done only added to the file I was building. I spent the next week researching what I could do, not just legally, but structurally. My parents had used my diagnosis for years as a tax tool, a reimbursement loophole, and a way to get sympathy from their friends. They played the role of the sacrificing parents of a chronically ill child. I found blog posts my mum wrote on parenting forums, heart-wrenching fiction about the daily battle of managing my condition. She never mentioned that she hadn't taken me to an appointment in 2 years. But the real turning point came when I discovered a GoFundMe page they set up 2 years ago, in my name. It had raised over $6,000 for Daniel's ongoing treatment and insulin refills. The pictures they posted were old hospital photos from when I was first diagnosed. I hadn't seen a dollar of it, not one. That campaign had long since ended, but it still existed, still public, still filled with strangers commenting, praying for your son and your such devoted parents. It made my stomach turn. I printed it all out, pages and pages of lies and receipts. My plan wasn't about hurting them, it was about truth. I contacted every donor I could through the campaign page and explained the situation. I wasn't accusatory, I was measured, respectful, honest. Some didn't respond, but others did, and they were furious. Some asked for refunds. One woman even told me she worked in non-profit fraud investigation and offered to help report the page to GoFundMe for misrepresentation and medical exploitation. I said yes. While that ball rolled, I made another quiet move. I contacted my university's financial aid office and explained my situation. I showed them my medical bills, my parents' lack of support, and the fact that I had been living under false pretenses of care. They re-evaluated my status, and within a week, I was granted an independent student designation. It meant I could apply for grants, scholarships, and aid on my own, without their signatures, without their shadow. I had been under their roof, but not under their control anymore. Meanwhile, I continued to act like everything was normal. I nodded during dinner, answered when spoken to, and kept my tone even. But every night, I built more, forwarded documents, made copies, created backups. I wasn't just preparing to leave. I was preparing to expose a system they had built on lies, pity, and my survival, and I was doing it in silence. They had taught me to be quiet. They just didn't realize that silence could cut sharper than words. It started unraveling with a phone call. GoFundMe had flagged the campaign after multiple complaints and opened an investigation. My parents got the email first. I watched from the hallway as my mum's voice climbed with confusion, then panic. "It's a mistake," she said. "We didn't do anything wrong." But her fingers trembled on the phone screen. My dad stood behind her, silent, unreadable. For once he had no defense. He looked at her the way someone looks at a mirror cracking under its own reflection. I didn't say a word. I just walked past them, coolly, slowly, holding a folder that looked like it could have contained homework, but instead held a chronological history of every financial and medical manipulation they'd committed in my name. I tucked it under my pillow and went about my day. They tried to question me that night. Softly at first. "Danny, did you report something?" I just looked up from my book and said, "I don't know what you mean," because I didn't need to lie. I just didn't need to explain anymore. The investigation spread like wildfire behind the scenes. Some of the donors had connections in local media. A small online article was published under the title "Parents Accused of Medical Exploitation Through Child's Illness Fund." Names weren't mentioned, but the story was unmistakable. My mum's parenting blog went dark. Her forum accounts were deleted. The world she'd built on martyrdom and manufactured struggle was evaporating in real time. And still I said nothing. Then the insurance company called. They were auditing the FSA account. Apparently, someone had anonymously submitted a report detailing mismatched claims. I didn't admit it was me, but I had sent them everything they needed: dates, transactions, photos. It wasn't malicious, it was factual. The way I saw it, if you play with fire long enough, eventually someone brings a flashlight. The audit began 2 weeks later, and my dad's access to the fund was frozen pending review. They weren't just embarrassed now, they were scared. Elena finally noticed something was wrong when her credit card got declined at a boutique. She came home raging, slamming doors, accusing them of ruining her life. I stayed in my room, door shut, listening to the chaos. She had no idea what they'd sacrificed for her, or more accurately, what they took from me to feed her illusions. I didn't blame her, not fully, but I didn't protect her either. That wasn't my job anymore. They tried to talk to me again the next morning, but I was already packed. My university had approved emergency housing. I didn't say goodbye. I just left a letter on the kitchen table. It wasn't angry, just honest. I told them I'd forgiven them. But that forgiveness wasn't the same as returning. I said, "Your silence nearly killed me. Mine set me free." Then I walked out the door without looking back. Living on my own felt like breathing for the first time. The kind of breath that fills your lungs fully. No apology, no compromise. My new dorm room wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The fridge had space for my insulin. My schedule didn't revolve around guilt. And for the first time in years, I didn't have to explain why I was tired. I was tired because I had survived. And now I was finally allowed to rest. A few weeks after I left, I got a letter from the insurance company. It confirmed the results of the audit. Multiple reimbursements for non-medical expenses filed under my name. They didn't press charges, but they demanded repayment. Thousands of dollars. It was enough to shake their finances loose. I later found out they had to sell off some investments and cancel Elena's next once-in-a-lifetime experience. My dad even took on a second job. All because they gambled with my life and lost. The GoFundMe page was permanently removed. The platform issued a public apology and refunded the remaining donors. But the ripple didn't stop there. A local news outlet followed up with a piece about financial abuse within families, and while they didn't name us directly, people connected the dots. My mom's friends stopped calling. Her Facebook became a ghost town. No more sympathy, no more curated narratives. Just a digital graveyard of a persona that once thrived on pity and pretense. They never publicly acknowledged what they did. No apologies, no explanation, just silence. But I didn't need an apology. I wasn't waiting for one. Sometimes the most powerful closure doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from walking away without giving people a second chance to hurt you, and that's what I did. Quietly, fully, without drama. I changed my phone number, updated my records, and cut the cord that had kept me emotionally leashed for too long. The part that surprised me most was how little I missed them. Not because I hated them, I didn't, but because I had outgrown the need for their version of love. A love that came with conditions, that prioritized concerts over survival, that twisted sacrifice into showmanship. No one deserves to beg for care, especially not from those who claim to love you. And once I stopped begging, I realized how strong I had become. In the stillness of my new life, I found something I didn't know I was missing: peace. Not the kind you get from silence, but the kind that grows from clarity. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused, determined, awake, and more than anything, I was free. Free from the shame they tried to make me carry. Free from the idea that I had to earn compassion. Free to become the kind of person I never saw in that house. Someone who protects without using pain. Freedom doesn't come all at once. It arrives in moments, small, almost invisible ones, that tell you the nightmare is behind you. The first time I ordered my insulin and had it delivered directly to me without interference, I cried. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I wasn't. Because it was simple, safe, mine. That small box represented something bigger than medicine. It meant I had control over my own body for the first time in years. I started speaking more openly with others. Quietly. Of course, I didn't broadcast my story, but I didn't hide it either. At a university health forum, I gave a talk about medical independence and family abuse. I didn't name my parents, but every sentence carried a weight they'd given me. Afterward, a student approached me. Her brother had a chronic condition too. She whispered, "I think my parents are doing something similar." We talked for an hour. She left with numbers, steps, confidence. That night I felt something I hadn't before. Not just relief, but purpose. Elena tried to reach out once. She sent a voice memo through an old mutual friend. Her tone was annoyed, as if I'd embarrassed the family. "You didn't have to ruin everything just because you got sick," she said. It didn't even hurt. That was the strange part. It didn't hurt at all, because when someone reveals who they are without even trying, you don't argue with them, you believe them, and then you move on. I wrote back, just one sentence: "Tell her I'm glad she enjoyed the concert. I survived mine too." I never heard from her again. And I was okay with that. I had no more space inside me for bitterness, only growth. I was learning how to build a life that didn't revolve around being someone's second thought, a life that didn't require forgiveness to move forward, only direction. Months passed. I found part-time work in the university's Disability Services office, helping other students navigate support systems. There was something healing about it, turning what nearly destroyed me into a toolkit for someone else's survival. Each conversation reminded me that silence had once been my enemy, but now it was my ally. I didn't need to shout my story. I just needed to live it. What my parents never understood was that I never wanted vengeance. I just wanted value. And when they refused to see mine, I learned how to define it myself. That's not just justice, that's rebirth. I still remember the day I officially changed my emergency contact forms. It was such a minor task, a formality, but it felt like a declaration. I removed both my parents' names and listed the name of a professor who had quietly mentored me through the chaos. She knew the whole story, and when I asked if I could list her, she said, "Of course, you've never been a burden, Daniel." That sentence alone unraveled years of internal knots. I had spent my childhood believing I was too much, too complicated, too medical to be loved fully, and now someone had proven otherwise. A few weeks later, I received a letter, handwritten, my father's handwriting. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. It wasn't an apology, not really. It was a justification disguised as sorrow. "We didn't know how serious it was," he wrote. "Your mother just wanted to make Elena happy. We thought you'd understand." That was the line that stayed with me. "We thought you'd understand," as if understanding their betrayal was my responsibility, as if survival required patience, not action. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because that letter wasn't for me. It was for him. A man trying to free himself from guilt without doing the work of repentance. It's easy to mistake silence for forgiveness, but what I gave him wasn't forgiveness, it was release. I let go of the need to fix what he broke. I let go of the boy who once waited by the door, hoping his parents would show up on time. I let go of the expectation that people who hurt you will be the ones to heal you. Some nights, I'd still dream of the kitchen floor, the cold tiles against my cheek, the metallic taste in my mouth, the panic as my body shut down. But even in the dreams, something had changed. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was watching, aware, in control. That's how I knew I'd healed, not because the memories disappeared, but because they lost their power to define me. I never told anyone the full scope of what I did. Not because I was hiding it, but because the work was done. The storm had passed. I didn't need applause. I didn't need to be the hero. I just needed to live. And I was finally doing that. Every time I filled my prescription, every time I woke up knowing I was safe, every time I smiled without thinking of survival, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that my parents were still dealing with the aftermath of what they did, not through public humiliation, but through slow consequences, financial strain, social isolation, the loss of their favorite scapegoat. I didn't need to destroy them. I just needed to stop saving them. I had always believed justice had to be loud, gavel strikes, courtroom confessions, some kind of reckoning. But now I understood that real justice can look like silence. It can look like distance. It can look like thriving in the absence of people who expected you to fall apart. The world didn't collapse when I left their house. In fact, it expanded. I finally had space to breathe, to grow, to decide who I was without their story shaping me. I started writing again, just for myself at first. Short reflections, small journal entries. Then essays, then articles. I wrote about medical neglect, about emotional abuse, about how hard it is to explain what it feels like when your life is treated like an inconvenience. My writing got shared, first in small groups, then wider. A non-profit for chronic illness advocacy reached out and asked if I'd consider being a speaker. I said yes. I didn't need to hide anymore. I had a voice, and it was steady. The irony was, the more I succeeded, the less I thought about them. My life began to fill with people who saw me, not the disease, not the burden, just me. Friends who texted to check in when they knew I had a long day. Professors who asked about my health with genuine concern. A girl in one of my lectures who later became the first person I ever told the entire story to. She cried, not because it was dramatic, but because she understood what it felt like to survive something no one believed was that serious. One afternoon, I got a message from my old neighbor, Mrs. Bennett. She was one of the few adults who had ever truly noticed me. "Your parents moved," she wrote. "Quick sale, left without saying goodbye to anyone." I didn't ask where they went. I didn't want to know. But I thanked her. I realized then how small their world had become. How their desperate attempts to maintain control had ended with them running not from me but from the truth that had always been waiting for them. The court of public opinion had done its work. Quietly, neatly. They weren't shamed online. They weren't doxxed. They were simply seen for who they were and stripped of the roles they once used to control everyone around them. No more devoted mother posts. No more teary anecdotes on forums. Just silence. And that, I realized, was the justice I never could have planned. Not a punishment. A mirror, held up, unflinching, and they had to face it alone. It took me over a year to walk into a clinic and not flinch when someone said family history. The question used to hit like a bruise, not because I didn't have one, but because mine was written in betrayal. I used to lie. Supportive parents, I'd say. Stable home, the truth didn't feel safe. But now, I had stopped covering for them. Now, when someone asked, I just said, "It's complicated," and left it there. My story didn't need to be understood by everyone, only respect. One day, during a guest panel on medical ethics at the university, a question came up. What's the difference between a mistake and a betrayal? I didn't answer right away. But when I did, I said this. A mistake is when someone hurts you out of ignorance. A betrayal is when they hurt you and expect you to understand why. The room went silent. Not out of shock, but recognition. So many people carry quiet wounds. So few ever get the space to speak them. After the panel, a student approached me. He was 19, lanky, with a backpack that looked heavier than him. "My dad flushes my meds when he gets mad," he said. "Tells me I don't need them." I didn't give him advice. I just listened, because that's what I needed too once. Someone to hear me and not question whether it was real. He left with a plan. Not revenge, just protection. And for the first time, I felt like what I'd been through had purpose. There were still days I'd remember the kitchen floor. I think I always will. Trauma has a way of carving its initials into the body. But I no longer felt owned by it. The memories came without shame. They were just part of the map, not the destination. I learned how to hold my own hand, how to speak to myself like someone worth saving. And in those quiet moments I realized I had become the parent I never had. I don't check on my family. I don't Google their names. If they're out there still trying to rewrite history, I wouldn't know. That chapter is closed. Not torn out, not erased, just done. I let it sit on the shelf where it belongs, a story I survived but no longer carry with me. I outgrew their version of love, and I built something better. If you'd told me, back when I lay unconscious on a tile floor, that I would one day be leading panels, mentoring students, and living in peace, I might have laughed. But the truth is, survival isn't the end of the story. It's just the doorway, and I walked through it. By the time I reached my final year at university, I had created something I never imagined. Stability. Real stability. Not the kind built on walking on eggshells or trying to keep someone else happy, but one rooted in truth, boundaries, and quiet self-respect. I had a routine. I had access to medication without fear. I had friends who looked me in the eye and saw a person, not a condition, not a pawn, and more than anything, I had peace in the silence. The kind that comes when there's no one left to perform for. I began to understand something deeper about power. It doesn't always look like a courtroom verdict or a social media scandal. Sometimes power is choosing not to engage. Sometimes it's saying nothing when provoked. Sometimes it's knowing you could destroy someone, but deciding to rebuild yourself instead. That kind of control, the quiet kind, is what they never taught me, because they never had it. One spring afternoon, I was invited to speak at a conference for chronic illness advocacy. I hesitated at first. The idea of sharing something so personal with strangers, of naming what I had endured, terrified me. But then I realized this wasn't about me anymore. It is about everyone who had ever felt helpless under their own roof. Everyone who had been told they were too expensive, too dramatic, too inconvenient. I wrote my speech in one sitting, and I didn't hold back. I told the truth, not the polished version, the real one. I told them about the cancelled order, the coma, the GoFundMe page, the stolen reimbursements. I told them about the silence, but I ended with what mattered most. I told them about the peace that followed, not because justice came swiftly, but because I created it. That room of strangers stood in applause, not for the pain but for the power reclaimed after it. I didn't cry,